What? Do you have any idea how long that took? Let me guess, you're here for a strong commander that can win by doing something niche, like giving your opponents cards. But you don't actually want them to play those cards, do you? You want to control with removal, counterspells, and have a high win rate? You don't? You want something a little more refined? Alright, so let's talk about a niche commander here. Do you like big red damage? Drawing you and your opponent's cards? Just making the game an overall mess and sometimes winning out of nowhere? Perfect, let's not waste any more time. But first, what is Adamaro? Adamaro, a spirit from the plane of Kamigawa. Once he was a feared human warrior, but his anger and envy consumed him. Now, beware Adamaro, in him all pain and anger is perfected. Adamaro First to Desire is a 3-mana, 1 red star spirit. It reads Adamaro First to Desire's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in the hand of the opponent with the most cards in hand. Adamaro is a relatively cheap commander, being only 3 CMC, but is largely underwhelming. Lack of keywords of his power and toughness relying on opponent with most cards in hand can hold him back. But this could be a benefit. Removing a vanilla creature like Adamaro with a more threatening commander out should shame the player who removed him, forever marking themselves as a brain-dead individual. That is until you have a few more key pieces in play to make Adamaro strong enough to level the entire table. Adamaro benefits from the more cards your opponents have in hand. So, building the deck, Adamaro uses a lot of forced card draw that you see in artifacts and typical wheels Red can provide, trying to keep your opponent's hands filled. The obvious downside of growing your commander this way is that you're filling your opponent's hands with cards. Now, is this a good strategy? Oh, hell no. But is it a fun one? Oh, absolutely. Before I keep bashing Adamaro for a bit longer, let me say that he is one of my favorite commanders, just hands down. The group draw and group slug theme feels unique and fun, and even if the group slug theme fails, it's a good time seeing your opponents pop off against one another while you sit there, watching their decks overperform because of the cards you've been drawing them. So be proud, you've caused this madness. That being said, Adamaro is overshadowed by other group draw commanders. Nekusar, the Mind Razor, who benefits not just from his base abilities forcing draw and pinging opponents every time they draw, but the additional colors blue and black gaining access to more wheel effects, punishing enchantments, removal, draw, etc. Cyrus, the Writhing Storm, has Timu colors and makes snakes whenever an opponent draws a card except for the first one they draw on their draw step. By making so many tokens, it works well with cards like Impact Tremors and other ETB pingers, giving you a board and more cards while killing your opponents. Having more colors for a forced draw strategy versus monocolor gives you more freedom to answer the cards you're giving your opponents, and more options to draw cards or wheel. So in all, no wonder that on EDH Rec, Adamaro only has 240 decks. But I think he's wildly underused for such a fun theme in monocolors, especially red. Let's discuss the overall game plan of the deck. For starters, Adamaro obviously benefits from having opponents having more cards in their hands, but only with the opponent with the most cards. For instance, if someone has 2, another has 5, and the last player has 4, he is a 5/5 vanilla creature. Which, let's talk about getting your opponent's cards. One way the deck plays that differs from others like it is that the commander doesn't care so much about the draw triggers, but just overall amount in their hand. This can be more straightforward in deck building for Adamaro, seeking to instead just get cards in your opponent's hands and not being too concerned with getting the draw triggers from a bunch of wheel effects. We still use several, but consistent draw effects is what we prefer. Since you'll want to be drawing your opponent's cards, the usual artifact suspects are auto-includes into this strategy. So Fauna Mythos, Howling Mine, Horn of Greed, and Temple Bell, to name some. These are crucial for the game plan, so we run several tutors to get them. They'll be covered in just a moment. But other than that, having one of these in your opening hand is optimal since it can help you draw into even more of your draw effects. The tutors, Gamble and Reckless Handling, let us get our card draw engines, but at the risk of discarding them by accident. Besides artifacts, we have some creatures to help get Adamaro growing, like Humble Defector, which is a fun card to not only draw cards for yourself, but playing a little politics and passing him around. Shah of Nar Isle, a 4-mana 6/6, which opponents can optionally draw 3 cards at the beginning of your next turn. I mean, who doesn't want to draw 3? And Zenith Chronicler, while you are unable to make people draw with it, can draw people cards quite easily given how popular multicolor commanders are. The final trick up our card draw sleeve is this: our opponent's decks. Most commanders and decks at EDH want to not stall out, so they draw cards themselves. Occasionally, they even play ways to increase their maximum hand size, like a Thought Vessel, sometimes the occasional Reliquary Tower. Simply put, EDH decks seek to play their game, and to play, they'll need cards. If they cheat cards into play from their deck or graveyard, sadly this doesn't help us, but the natural extra draw from opponents fueling themselves will only get them killed in the later stages of the game. Before we get into deck synergies and further into why our opponents having 20 plus cards in their hand is a good thing for us, we'll discuss one more crucial artifact for the deck. Anvil of Bogdarin. while sitting at a pricey $30, is a top pick for Adamaro. I shouldn't have to specify why, since the first sentence in its text box says, each player skips his or her discard phase. The rummage effect is a bonus for everyone, but having our opponents gain no maximum hand size makes it so our commander can keep growing, and other burn payoffs all the more damaging. But before we cover those, how do we win with our 3-mana vanilla commander? Combat, while ineffective for a vanilla creature like Adamaro, can still be a useful phase. Adamaro, being a 3-mana 5/5 most of the time on curve, sometimes a 4/4, can be a beater at the table while you play your forced card draws. Adamaro won't be a threat for a while, but with equipment he can become one faster. Commander's Blade, a 1-mana artifact with a reduced equip cost of 3 if it targets our commander, gives him protection from every color except for red. This means if your opponents don't have a red or colorless blocker, he's effectively unblockable, not to include untargetable from their spot removal spells. Fiend Lash grants +2/+0 in reach, but what we really care about is that whenever Adamaro is dealt damage, he deals damage equal to his power to target player or planeswalker. I have thrown over 20 damage face with this card before, and I suspect I'll be able to do it again. Finally, a card that doesn't see much play from a very popular cycle of equipment, the Sword of War and Peace. This grants our commander protection from red and white, and whenever an equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, Sword of War and Peace deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards in their hand, and you gain 1 life for each card in your hand. This effect alone highlights what our deck wants, to deal damage to our opponents equal to the cards in their hand. The life gain as an added bonus is great for racing other aggro decks and keeping yourself topped off. Remember, most of the time you're drawing your opponent's cards, you're drawing yourself cards too, so that life gain can be a significant amount at times. While not an equipment but still tied into attacking, Unquenchable Fury is a 3-mana enchantment that, whenever this creature attacks, it deals X damage to the defending player, where X is the number of cards in their hand. Adamaro doesn't even have to connect with the opponent, the attack alone triggers the effect. And yet, an upside is if Adamaro were to die, we get the enchantment back to our hand for later use. Now, most of the time that I played this deck and won, it wasn't from combat. Instead, I found that punishing your opponents for having cards in hand with high damaging effects like a Gaze of Adamaro, complete flavor win by the way, and funny as hell that he has laser eyes, Balor's attack and death trigger, Ember Wild Captain's effect that if your opponent would attack you while they're Monarch, which bonus that you've introduced another way for them to draw cards if they take the Monarch from you, and Vicious Shadows. Vicious Shadows isn't cheap, but resolving it late game and having a Blasphemous Act to clear the board all but spells game over. I have more effects in the deck, but we won't be covering them all here. Not moving on from punishing our greedy opponents just yet, I want to re-highlight that Balor is a powerhouse here. If it could be the commander, it probably should be. Repeatable damage to our opponents equal to the cards in their hand every turn we swing, and with an option to choose one or more of its effects. Hell, even when it dies, you're still getting value out of it. Those cover our main win conditions and damaging effects for Adamaro. Now, so let's say if your opponent just has 4 cards in their hand, or less. Well, you failed at your job if this is later in the game, but don't worry. To keep our opponent's cards in their hands, we can do something gross. Light stack effects like Lodestone Golem and God Pharaoh Statue can keep cards in their hands for longer. I only run these 2 in the deck besides a certain enchantment, but even then, I'm considering removing Lodestone Golem from the deck since it's not too fun to play against. But if you want to make this deck better, artifact stack pieces are probably pretty good, but again, I don't think that's fun. In fact, as I'm making this video, I removed Lodestone Golem in favor of a Hate Bearer, Scytheclaw Raptor. Burning opponents for interacting with our strategies for 4 damage is an amazing rate, but will bite us if we're not careful since it affects every player. If you really wanted to win with Adamaro, there's some Stax pieces you can include in the deck. I'll put them up on the screen now, but I won't be going into them any further. May I introduce you to any big red player's wet dream, the triple doublers. All the previous damaging effects we went over, imagine triple or double damage. Outstanding. It's simple, it's expensive mana cost wise, but effective, especially our triplers. Fiery Emancipation and City on Fire have, if a source you control will do damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage instead. This is how you win out of nowhere easily. Having pinged the life totals enough here and there, and dropping one of these enchantments with a deals damage to opponent equal to cards in their hand can just one round the table. Soltham, Mayhem Dominus, a doubler for our non-combat damage spells, can pair well with cards like Iron Maiden and Ebony Owl Netsuke. Well, that and a lot of our decks since we use a lot of non-combat damage. Once again, it's time to mention some personal favorites and all-stars. You'll be using a lot of artifacts in the deck. A fun enchantment you don't see too often, Bludgeon Brawl, allows the table to equip non-equipment artifacts, making everything an artifact melee. I've killed via commander damage by equipping Adamaro with Temple Bell and a Soul Ring. Really fun card. Coveted Jewel, a 6-mana artifact that has, when it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, and tap to add 3 mana of one color. The real reason we want it in the deck is that when someone attacks us and is unblocked, that player gains control of Coveted Jewel, draws 3 cards, and untaps it. I've willingly let people hit me to take the Jewel, since who doesn't want a draw 3 and 3 extra mana? I've yet to see it pass around peacefully besides me being the first one to let it go. Beside note, I think this card attracts way more attention than the Monarchy. Bolt Bend, a budget version of Deflecting Swat, is almost cost reduced to 1 red and can redirect a removal spell targeted at Adamaro, or just about any spell that targets a permanent. Trust me, you can find some ways to be creative with this. Lastly, Wanda Wonder. It's a Timmy card, I know I should be ashamed for having it here, but it's just so fun. While a total of 8 mana to cast maybe one opponent's spell randomly from their library sucks, you do get to pick from among 3 other players at the table. The likelihood of this missing is really slim, and considering how much I've used this card, I don't think I've whipped a fit yet. In fact, I won a game off this card, believe it or not. No, I will not elaborate. If you're interested in building Adamaro, I've linked the deck list in the description below. There's plenty of cards in there that I've not covered in the video, so feel free to take a look. Oh, looks like our time's up. I'll see you later. Now go and spread that card draw and punish them for daring to draw cards out of